When we think about velocity, we often think about a higher velocity equating to a higher volume. And that makes sense because in the real world, generally speaking, whenever we hit an object harder, it makes a louder sound. But there's so much more we can do with velocity to also affect the timbre of a sound as well as its volume. And in this video, I want to explore a few ways that you can use velocity in your sound design to add a little bit more interest and nuance to your sounds. Let's jump right in. Okay, so to start with, here in Ableton Live, I have a default wavetable device, which just sounds like this. Now, in the default wavetable device, we actually have velocity automatically mapped to control the volume or the output of the synthesizer as a whole. We can see this if we go over to the MIDI tab, and we can see velocity, or VEL here, is actually mapped to the amplitude, meaning that a harder velocity, if I play a harder note or a high velocity note on my keyboard, it will come out louder than if I play a softer note. Now, this is pretty negligible at this level, but we'll leave it for the moment in terms of designing this sound. So let's just change a few of the synth parameters here. I'm going to change this wavetable up to a sawtooth wave instead of a sine wave, so we get a little bit more full frequency spectrum of a sound. And here we should also be able to hear the effect of that velocity as well. Now, to add a little bit more interest to the sound when we play it at a higher velocity, let's also use the velocity to increase or decrease the filter frequency of the sound. So if I just go to our filter section here in the center, let's just pull down the cutoff frequency of this first filter. And you can see that when I grab this, we have the filter 1 cutoff frequency added to the matrix in our MIDI tab here. So now let's just go to the velocity control and increase the level of the velocity or the depth of the velocity controlling the filter frequency. And so you can hear and see there that when I play a harder velocity on my MIDI keyboard, we have a more open filter. And this is just kind of the beginning of the stuff that you can do with velocity. Now let's start thinking about designing the sound a little bit more. I'm going to go to my modulation sources here, and let's change the amplitude envelope to have an entirely open sustain and a little bit of a release. And you can already hear how much more nuance this sound has, as opposed to if I just had the velocity controlling the volume and not the filter. In order to shape the timbre of the sound even a little bit more, let's adjust some of the other parameters of the oscillators with velocity as well. For example, let's go to the oscillator 1 here, and in wavetable, I can increase this fold amount, which is kind of like a sync. Let's have velocity control this as well. So let's go back to our MIDI tab, and we can see that oscillator 1 fold shown up here in our matrix. Let's just increase the amount that velocity is controlling that fold. If we wanted, we could also control, say, the wavetable position with velocity. So let's select the wavetable oscillator 1 position here, and again, just increase the velocity to this very slightly. Now, of course, depending on the wavetable you have and kind of how it changes over time in different positions, you'll get very, very different sounds with this. Just to show you, let's actually choose a different wavetable here. I might go from basics. Let's go to filter. And we get a very different sound right out of the gate. Let's go back and set that to basic shapes. So now let's kind of add a little bit more movement to this sound using envelopes. What I want to do here is actually have an envelope to control the filter cutoff, so I have a bit more of a plucky sound. Let's do this with envelope 2. So I'm going to go to my mod sources, go to envelope 2, let's turn down the sustain all the way, attack to 0 milliseconds, and have our decay here adjusted so we can hear that kind of plucky sound. Let's go to our matrix and set envelope 2 to control or adjust the filter 1 frequency over time. So we can increase this a little bit. Cool, let's reduce this filter frequency even more so we have more range. Alright, so we have a higher velocity opening up the filter more, and we also have this filter being controlled by the envelope. Let's do a little bit more here to add some more nuance to the sound. Let's go to our MIDI tab and let's pull down the amount that this velocity is actually affecting this filter 1 frequency here, just very slightly. Next, I'm actually going to go to the modulation sources and go to my envelope 2, and we're going to adjust a few of these parameters with velocity as well. For example, let's go to the value here, and I can adjust the peak value of this envelope with velocity, which will basically control the depth of the modulation of this envelope to the filter frequency with a higher or lower velocity. So let's select this peak value, go to our MIDI control, come to velocity. We can see that envelope 2 peak is showing up down here, down the bottom. Let's increase this amount. And now a higher velocity will result in a more intense envelope. We can even take this a step further by having the velocity adjust the length or the timing of the envelope as well. For example, let's go back to our mod sources and let's go to the time section of envelope 2, and we can have velocity adjust the attack and the decay here of this envelope as well. So let's select attack, go to MIDI, and let's just have it so that we have a higher velocity being a faster attack. So now instead of dragging this positively, I'm going to drag it negatively so that a higher velocity decreases the attack level. Let's pull this down even more, and in order to hear this a bit better, let's go back to our envelope and increase the attack just slightly. This can require a little bit of fiddling to get right, so let's go back to MIDI. Let's just adjust this velocity value here a little bit. Pretty cool, right? And again, let's go back to that envelope, select the decay, and also now have that velocity control the decay of this envelope. So let's go to MIDI, come down to here, and now we want a harder velocity to, again, be a shorter decay, so we can pull this down in the negative direction so that we now have a higher velocity, being a shorter decay, and a lower velocity, being a slower decay. Again, this can require a little bit of fiddling to get right. So let's muck around with this a little bit. Let's increase the decay slightly. Let's increase the attack slightly here as well. Let's go back to here and adjust these depth amounts slightly too. Let's go back to our mod sources. Let's increase the release of envelope 2 and the release of the amplitude envelope just slightly so we get a little bit more of a longer sound. Awesome. For the sake of it, let's also maybe go ahead and add a second filter. So let's go ahead and turn on filter number 2, set this to maybe something like a notch filter, and we can have the velocity here adjust, say, the frequency of this filter. So let's select this, go to the MIDI, pull down the velocity so that we have a harder velocity, changing that position of the notch filter. And actually this time, instead of having the envelope control this filter, let's have an LFO control this filter. So let's go to our matrix. We can see filter 2 frequency shown up here, and let's map this to LFO 1. Let's go into LFO 1 and let's maybe pull down the rate slightly. And let's actually have the velocity control the rate of this LFO. So let's go to our MIDI, and now LFO 1 rate has shown up here. Let's increase the velocity to the LFO 1 rate. Now a harder velocity will be a faster rate. I still want it to be fairly subtle, so I don't want it to be a massive jump, but we can still have it affect the rate in a way. Let's increase the resonance of the first filter. Let's maybe change its filter circuit to something like MS2, increase the drive a little bit. And now we can adjust all of these modulation amounts and depths to really get that level of control that we want. One last thing to do in the synthesizer is maybe go to the Unison mode, change it to something like classic, and let's pull down the amount a little bit and also have velocity control the amount of the Unison detune. So let's go to MIDI. We have Unison amount here selected. Let's increase the depth of the velocity to the Unison. Let's increase the Unison amount a little bit more, maybe increase that depth. And just because we're getting a little bit loud here, I'm going to pull down the overall volume of the wavetable. By the way, if you want to improve your production skills and learn things like sound design and synthesis, I offer one-on-one music production lessons and monthly mentorships and monthly track feedbacks all through my Buy Me a Coffee page. And I also have an online course that is really useful for both beginners and intermediates that teaches you all of the fundamentals of things that you need to know about how to create your very own music using Ableton Live. You can check out all those things in the description. Now, if you're using Ableton Live, or if you're using another synthesizer such as maybe Serum or Vital or Pigments or Faceplant or something like that that allows you to modulate effects parameters as well, we can actually do that with velocity too. So for example, let's say I wanted to have a higher velocity equate to more delay on that particular note. I'm going to go ahead and add a delay here after the wavetable. And just so that I can have a little bit more control over this delay, I'm actually going to go ahead and set up a little bit of a parallel chain here. And if you don't know how to do this or why I'm doing this, you can check out my video on this right here. But I'm going to just right click, group this, increase the dry wet of this delay all the way to 100%, open up the chain list, right click, create a new chain, and now I have this delay chain here, which is our delay, and our dry chain here, which is our dry. And I'm going to go to this delay, and I'm actually going to go to the utility and add a utility before this delay. And then what I'm going to do is pull this utility all the way down to negative infinity. And basically what this means is that we're not sending any of the direct signal into the delay, so we can control which signals are sent into the delay. It's basically a fancy send and return setup, but just on the track itself. So for example, if I play a note, we don't have a delay, but if I increase this utility gain, we have a delay on that particular note. So let's pull this back down to negative infinity and actually use velocity to control this gain value. To do this, I'm going to use Ableton Live's expression control device, which will be placed before the wavetable. Now, this is the expression control device in Ableton Live 12. If you're using Ableton Live 11, the expression control device will look a little bit different, but it will function basically exactly the same. So here what we can do is just click on map and then choose where we want to map this velocity to. I'm going to map it to the gain of this utility. Now, one thing that we just want to be aware of here is to set the ranges so that we don't have the gain going really high to like plus 35 dB. If you want to, you can set up, say, a macro control or something for this with the utility, but just for the sake of this, I'm going to leave it with the expression control device and just control this level of modulation with the output range here on this expression control. So let's fold up this wavetable so we can see really exactly what's going on with the expression control here and the utility. And so you can see there that a higher velocity is actually meaning that we have more delay applied to that particular note. We can change the delay settings, maybe adjust the filter, set it to ping pong, change the feedback, maybe even set it to say quarter notes. And now we have a really expressive sound that reacts to the changes in velocity in really dynamic ways. To showcase how you might use this in a programmed way, let's create a MIDI clip here and just put in some kind of random arpeggiated pattern. So let's just put in something here. And so you can see that currently all of these notes are set to the same velocity, but let's actually just randomize the velocity of these different notes. So to do this, I can select all of these notes and I can just increase this randomized value here. And now when I play this, you'll hear that each of these different notes have some slight variation to them based on their velocity levels. I could randomize the velocities again. And And you can hear how we can really change the feeling of this pattern just by changing the velocity of each of the different notes. Here's another example of a pluck sound that I've created using this exact same method. Here we have pretty much the velocity controlling the exact same parameters, except this time it's also controlling delay and reverb as well. Here I've got the exact same thing going on a bass sound, except I've also got velocity controlling the level of drive applied to a saturator too. And so hopefully through those examples, you can see just how much more than volume velocity really is, and you can go ahead and use these techniques to create your own nuanced and interesting synth sounds. If you want to learn how to apply these techniques in more of an MPE fashion, you can check out this video right here. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you all in the next video.